down here chasing blackfish off the stones. Well, I am anyway, and it's an awesome way to fish. It's very visual. You're watching a float, which you've got to weight just correctly because the blackfish are wily little characters. Before you know it, they would have taken your float down, snatched your weed, and you'll end up with nothing at all. You're carefully watching your float as it's drifting out in the wash, and as you see it slowly go down, you know that a blackfish has grabbed your bait, and you want to be ready to strike once he's had it down there for a little while. If you're too quick, you'll end up with nothing. It's, as I said, very visual and an awesome way to fish. You're always looking out into the water and looking at things. You never get bored with that style of fishing at all. What I love about rock fishing is the accessibility of it. Anyone can come down here, grab a little bit of gear and find a ledge like this one and hopefully catch some fish. One important thing you've got to be mindful of is the safety aspect. Sometimes the seas can be rather rough and it's very easy to get washed in, so make sure that you check the conditions before you head out. I'm wearing appropriate footwear, and these are nice and grippy and ideal for rock fishing. You can buy cleats that you can retrofit to other shoes as well, and some of the more popular spots will have angel rings, which will certainly save your life in the event of an accident. I love my spin gear, so down here I'm using a 9.6 6 to 12 pound spin rod with a 2500 size reel. It's a basic sort of setup, but it certainly does still catch fish as long as you've set your float correctly and you're ready and waiting when the blackfish take it down. The older guys you'll see are using center pin reels with a very slow tapered rod. A lot of guys love using that sort of equipment. Personally, I prefer not to go out and buy something specifically to target one variety of fish. The beauty of this sort of thing is that I can also use it if I want to spin lures off the stones, and you can catch bonito, tailor and things like that quite readily anywhere off the rocks in Australia.
I'm sitting here in one of my favourite rock fishing locations in Sydney. I've been fishing this piece of the coast for nearly 50 years now, and this particular area that we're filming in today has been constantly productive right through that time. There's a range of different sorts of fish that you can get here depending on the time of the year, and as we're here in the winter we've been targeting blackfish and drummer and groper, and we've done very well this morning. Rock fishing is a terrific sport. It's got its risks and they have to be managed, so you have to be aware of what the weather's doing, what the sea's doing, and basically if it's too rough you go home or you go somewhere else. But on a glorious day like this with a light westerly wind and a small swell, there's nothing better than spending a few hours trying to catch some of these popular species that we love targeting. So what I've got in my hand here is a standard blackfish rig, a centre pin reel and a long slow tapered graphite rod, which is ideal for catching blackfish and smaller drummer. Today I've also carried with me a bit of heavier stuff with some 7 kilo line so that I can have a flick in for a larger drummer or a smaller groper, and we've done a bit of that earlier in the day. If it was the middle of the summer I'd have a spin rod with me, or perhaps two, a light one to target bonito and the smaller tuna, and maybe a heavier one in case some kingfish popped up, which they still do around Sydney on the rocks.
Back in the day when I was a fish-mad young fella, most weekends were spent with my mates down here on the river. We'd come down with our yabby pumps and our rods and reels, pump some bait, usually live worms, squirt worms, and spend the day fishing. Yeah, there's a unique joy in doing this sort of back to basics, bread and butter fishing, and I think it can never be underestimated. And also fresh live bait that you've gathered in the area where you're going to fish. I mean, you're never ever going to get better bait than that. And in the Shoalhaven River where we are now, squirt worms are the #1 bait for most of the river species. They're fairly prolific. You look on the sand flats, there's small holes gathered together in clumps. Easy to tell them apart from the nipper holes. The nipper holes are usually much bigger. And you use a sieve to separate the sand and mud and the worms. And then once you've got enough for your day's fishing, and it's important just to take what you need because you can't store these worms. They don't last too long. A day or so is about max. You can't freeze them or anything like that. So you can only really take what you need for the immediate session. Once you've got those baits in there, you rig up with light line, small hooks, small sinkers, and a good spot to try your first effort is the actual area where you gathered the bait, because what you've done there is created basically a burley trail. All the mud and sediment and bits of broken worm that you've pumped, that's all spreading out with the tide, and whiting and bream are all moving up and eating that. So it's great to chuck a line out when you're finished gathering your bait, and often you get some pretty good fish. When we finished our bait gathering, we went for a walk with surface lures, spooked a couple of flatties, which was great to see. Saw one nice flatty about 60 centimetres and a few other smaller flatheads zoomed away as we walked along the shallow water, and we saw some lies where flathead were positioned on the high tide. That's another one of the great things about bait gathering. You get to get close and personal with the environment that you're fishing. You know, we caught some nice little bream. They're probably the most common catch you're going to get with live squirt worms in the Shoalhaven. They're great fun to catch. They weren't big fish, but you know, it's all in a perspective. We were using quite light line. I was using 3-pound fluorocarbon straight through to a long shanked hook, very small 00 size ball sinker, and just lobbing that out into the current and letting it waft back naturally, so that it just looked like a worm that had been dislodged from its hole and was just floating back into the current. That's the key to that sort of fishing. It's almost a finesse style of fishing, and you've got to be tuned into how the fish would expect a worm to be floating through the water. They're not expecting a worm just to be plonked down on the bottom. You know, a worm's almost weightless. Any current is going to be wafting through the water column. So you've got to present your bait in that way, and that, when you understand how that all works, that also helps your lure fishing, because then you can think, well, if you're using, say, a wriggler style lure, which actually represents a worm, you can sort of visualise how it should work through the water column. So it's all interconnected. You start out doing basic stuff, and you progress from there in your fishing career, and then once you've reached a certain stage in your fishing career, you begin to realise just how those things that you learnt as a kid influence what you do now as a more experienced angler, and how important it was to do that apprenticeship as a young fisher, as a jetty rat, just a kid sort of, you know, riding his bike down to the river on the weekend with his mates.
Unexpectedly compact, uncompromising reliability, unbelievably fuel efficient, unbridled power. Mercury has delivered a new range of 75 to 115 horsepower four-stroke outboards, unlike anything the world has ever seen. Unthink everything you know about four-stroke.
This is what, a 4 or 5 hour drive from Sydney. It's not too far for people to come. Spectacular spot. You can camp around the lake, or there's a couple of state recreation parks where you can camp up. A lot of the banks are reasonably steep, so the actual flat camping spots are, you know, you've got to look around for them. But in terms of pretty spectacular scenery, and there's lots of fish in here.
There is lots of fish. As you say, we've struck it at a time where the weather's turned around and done everything it can
Yeah,
to...
but we've still got, you know, a couple of cod.
We've got most of the species. We've got the ferals, but yeah. And I mean, there is trout in here. The fisheries have been stocking it with trout for the last few years. You know, go back a couple of decades ago and it was a brilliant trout fishery. So one of the most important things when you catch a cod like this, or any fish really, is to, if you're going to lift it out of the water like we're doing here for a picture, is to support its belly. Never hang it by its mouth. Can tear its internal organs and you kill the fish. So if you're going to grip it with a thumb grip, gloves is a good idea, unless you want cod thumb, which is a shredded thumb, which most people end up with when they catch a fish like this. Yeah, and don't keep it out of the water for any longer than what you can hold your breath for. So if you can hold your breath for about a minute, well, that's the longest you need the fish out of the water for. Very good. The natives are typically, if we're chasing cod, they're after small fish, yabbies. So yeah, they're really clued up to vibration and movement, and yeah, spinnerbaits.
Spinnerbaits, yeah,
Yeah.
they've got the vibration.
Well, the spinnerbaits, I mean, I suppose they're come a bit from the old days. We sort of had aeroplane spinners, which could have been that long with a heap of blades. But yeah, spinnerbaits nowadays, they just take so many cod and yellow belly, but they got the flash, they got the vibration. They've, you know, you can see why they work.
Well, one of the standout lures on our trip the last little while, mate, has been a lure that you wouldn't necessarily think would catch native fish, but it does, and it's these little Eco Gear ZX35s, which I guess look a bit like a yabby or a shrimp.
Well, they're made to look at the yabby, but you know, personally, I think why they work is the vibration. Like, you just lift the rod and you can feel them vibrate. And you know, any of these lures that we talk jackals, Mars Vibes, Trans Ams, TN50s, TN60s, they all, you know, they're brilliant lures for natives, and they've all got that rattle and shake and vibration. I'm sure like these natives they're so in tune to just a yabby flicking on the bottom, or a shrimp flicking. I mean, that's their natural defence. So when you're ripping those lures and giving it that vibration, that's what they, you know, when they're on, they're just on them all the time.
Nice little silver perch on a Storm Hottentot, classic native fish lure. Alright, we'll get this little guy back in the water, eh?